In the dimly lit chambers of Renaissance Florence, where whispered conversations could topple kingdoms and a single glance could seal a man's fate, Niccolò Machiavelli observed a truth that would echo through centuries: the most dangerous men are those who move like shadows, strike like lightning, and vanish like smoke. These are not the warriors who charge across battlefields with banners flying, nor the politicians who thunder from podiums. These are the architects of destiny who understand that true power lies not in what the world sees, but in what remains hidden. The strategy of silent victory begins with a fundamental recognition that weakness is not merely a flaw to be corrected, it is a mortal enemy to be destroyed. In the grand theater of human ambition, those who cling to their comfortable weaknesses become prisoners of their own limitations. They announce their intentions, telegraph their moves, and wonder why their enemies always seem one step ahead. The silent victor knows that every weakness is a handle by which others can manipulate him, every visible strength a target for destruction. Consider the merchant prince who built an empire while his competitors squabbled over market stalls. While others argued loudly about territory and prices, he quietly acquired the suppliers, the transport routes, and the information networks that would make their arguments meaningless. His rivals never saw him coming because he never announced his approach. When they finally realized what had happened, his victory was already complete and irreversible. This is the essence of invisible conquest. The understanding that the battle is won before the enemy realizes there is a war. The silent strategist operates on multiple levels simultaneously, creating conditions for success while his opponents remain focused on immediate, visible threats. He understands that power accumulated in darkness is more durable than power seized in daylight, because it cannot be challenged by those who do not know it exists. The weak self that must be destroyed is not merely personal failings or character flaws, it is the entire mindset that seeks validation, recognition, and immediate gratification. The weak self needs to be seen, to be acknowledged, to have its victories celebrated and its struggles recognized. This need for visibility is a fatal vulnerability in the game of real power. The moment you reveal your true capabilities, you invite measurement, competition, and, eventually, destruction. The transformation begins with learning to find satisfaction in outcomes rather than recognition. While others chase applause, the silent victor pursues results. While others build monuments to their ego, he builds systems that generate power continuously. The ego demands to be fed with praise and attention, the strategic mind feeds on effectiveness and control. In the shadows of history, we find countless examples of those who mastered this approach. They are not always the names written in golden letters in history books, because they understood that lasting influence often requires the sacrifice of temporary fame. The advisor who shapes policy while the king takes credit, the financier who moves markets while remaining invisible to regulators, the organizer who builds networks while others claim to be leaders, these are the practitioners of silent victory. The weak self believes that strength must be demonstrated to be real. It flexes its muscles in public, announces its intentions with fanfare, and mistakes activity for achievement. The silent strategist knows that demonstrated strength is diminished strength, because it immediately invites counters, challenges, and limitations. Real strength is like water, it finds the lowest point, fills every available space, and shapes its container while appearing to conform to it. This principle extends beyond personal power into every realm of human interaction. In business, the company that dominates markets is rarely the one that announces its intention to do so. It is the one that quietly builds capabilities, secures resources, and positions itself for inevitable expansion while competitors focus on short-term battles. In relationships, the person with true influence is not the one who demands respect or loyalty, but the one who creates conditions where respect and loyalty flow naturally toward them. The destruction of weakness requires more than simple self-control or discipline. It requires a fundamental rewiring of how one measures success and derives satisfaction. The weak self is addicted to immediate feedback, to the rush of being seen and acknowledged. The strategic self learns to find deeper satisfaction in the knowledge that one's plans are working, even when no one else recognizes it. This psychological transformation is perhaps the most difficult aspect of the silent strategy, because it requires giving up the ego's most cherished rewards. Society conditions us from childhood to seek approval, to display our achievements, to compete visibly for recognition. The silent victor must unlearn these patterns and develop new sources of motivation and satisfaction.
The process begins with small exercises in invisibility.
Instead of taking credit for a successful project, allow others to claim it while noting how your invisible contributions made it possible. Instead of arguing a point to prove your intelligence, let others believe they convinced you while you were already planning to agree. Instead of displaying your resources and capabilities, let others underestimate you while you quietly accumulate advantages. Each act of strategic invisibility strengthens the capacity for larger unseen operations. Like a muscle that grows stronger through resistance training, the ability to operate without recognition becomes more powerful through practice. The ego's need for validation gradually gives way to the deeper satisfaction of knowing that you are moving toward your goals more effectively than those who announce every step. The silent strategist also understands that information is the ultimate weapon, and the best information comes to those who do not appear threatening. People share secrets with those they consider harmless, reveal weaknesses to those they believe cannot exploit them, and discuss plans freely with those they assume lack the power to interfere. By maintaining a carefully calibrated appearance of limited threat, the silent victor gains access to intelligence that would be denied to more obviously powerful players. This does not mean appearing weak or incompetent. Such an appearance would limit opportunities and invite abuse. Instead, it means appearing focused on different priorities, interested in different rewards, playing a different game entirely. While others compete for position and recognition in the visible hierarchy, the silent strategist builds parallel systems of influence that operate according to different rules. The creation of these parallel systems requires patience and long-term thinking that most people cannot sustain. The weak self wants results now, recognition today, victory this quarter. The strategic self understands that the most powerful victories are those that unfold over years or even decades, creating conditions that become irreversible by the time they are recognized. Consider the technology entrepreneur who spent 15 years building relationships with engineers, investors, and industry insiders while working at various companies. When he finally launched his own venture, he did not need to convince anyone of his capabilities or fight for resources. The network he had built invisibly over more than a decade made his success appear sudden and inevitable to outside observers, but it was the result of patient, strategic relationship building that no competitor could quickly replicate. The power of such an approach lies in its compound nature.
Each invisible action creates small advantages that multiply over time. A favor done quietly today becomes leverage available tomorrow.
A piece of information gathered casually becomes crucial intelligence when circumstances change. A relationship built without obvious agenda becomes a channel for opportunity when the time is right. This compounding effect is why the destruction of the weak self is so critical. The weak self discounts future benefits in favor of immediate rewards, making it incapable of the patient accumulation that creates real power. It is like someone who sells their stock every time it gains a few percentage points, never allowing their investments to compound into true wealth. The silent strategist also masters the art of strategic positioning, always being where opportunity will emerge, but never so obviously that others recognize the pattern. This requires developing an almost supernatural sense for the flow of events, the ability to read subtle signals that indicate where power and opportunity are shifting before the changes become apparent to casual observers. This sensitivity to patterns and changes cannot be taught through simple rules or formulas. It develops through years of careful observation, of noting correlations between seemingly unrelated events, of tracking the consequences of decisions long after others have moved on to new concerns. It is the development of what might be called strategic intuition, the ability to sense opportunity and danger before they become obvious. The destruction of weakness is ultimately about destroying the illusions that keep most people trapped in patterns of limited effectiveness. The illusion that power requires recognition, that influence requires position, that victory requires others to know they have been defeated. The silent victor knows that the most complete victories are those where the defeated never realize what happened, never learn who was responsible, and, therefore, can never mount an effective counterattack. This approach requires a philosophical shift from competitive to strategic thinking. Competition assumes visible opponents, defined rules, and clear win/lose outcomes. Strategy recognizes that the most important games are those where the rules are hidden, the players are unknown, and victory conditions are never explicitly defined. In such games, the ability to remain invisible while shaping outcomes becomes the ultimate advantage. The man who destroys his weak self begins this transformation by recognizing that everything he has been taught about success and power may be precisely backward. That strength might lie in apparent yielding, that influence might require seeming irrelevance, that winning might demand that no one knows there was a contest. This recognition is not a loss but a liberation, freedom from the exhausting need to maintain an image, defend a position, or prove a point. In the end, the strategy of silent victory is not merely about achieving goals more effectively, though it certainly accomplishes that. It is about transcending the limitations that bind most people to patterns of struggle and conflict, discovering forms of power that are both more effective and more sustainable than those available to the loud and visible. Part 2: The Ruthless Calculus of Invisible Operations. The transformation from weakness to invisible strength requires more than philosophical understanding, it demands the development of what can only be called ruthless clarity. This is not the brutal aggression that destroys everything in its path, but rather the surgical precision that removes obstacles with minimal disturbance to the surrounding environment. The silent victor learns to calculate human nature with mathematical precision, understanding exactly what motivations drive each person in their sphere and how those motivations can be aligned with their own purposes. In the courtyard of a medieval castle, a young advisor watched as his lord prepared for what everyone believed would be a crucial negotiation with neighboring nobles. While the lord practiced his speeches and prepared his arguments, the advisor had already spent weeks learning about each negotiator's financial pressures, family concerns, and personal ambitions. By the time the formal negotiations began, he had already orchestrated private conversations that made the public agreement a mere formality. The lord believed his persuasive powers had won the day, the other nobles believed they had secured the best possible terms. Only the advisor knew that every outcome had been predetermined through careful manipulation of the underlying factors that truly drove each party's decisions. This is the essence of ruthless calculation, the recognition that people are predictable when you understand their true motivations, and that most conflicts can be resolved before they begin if you control the context in which decisions are made. The weak self approaches problems directly, announcing intentions and hoping for cooperation. The strategic self recognizes that cooperation is not requested but engineered, created through the careful alignment of incentives and the subtle removal of alternatives. The development of this capability requires abandoning comfortable illusions about human nature and social interaction. Most people prefer to believe that others act from noble motives, that honesty and directness are rewarded, that good intentions are sufficient for success. These beliefs make life more pleasant, but they also ensure continued vulnerability to those who understand the real mechanisms by which decisions are made. The ruthless calculator begins by observing that people rarely act from their stated motivations. They claim to be driven by principle but respond to pressure. They profess loyalty to causes but follow personal advantage. They announce grand visions but make decisions based on immediate fears and desires. This is not cynicism but realism, the recognition that understanding what people actually respond to is more useful than believing what they claim motivates them. Consider the corporate environment where everyone speaks of teamwork and shared goals while actually competing for limited promotions and resources. The visible players engage in this competition directly, forming alliances and making arguments for their advancement. The silent strategist recognizes that the real decisions are made based on factors that are never discussed in meetings: who controls information flows, who can solve problems others cannot, who makes the decision-makers' lives easier or more difficult. By focusing on these hidden factors rather than the official metrics of performance, the silent strategist can achieve advancement that appears effortless to observers. They do not compete for recognition because they have made themselves indispensable in ways that others do not recognize or cannot replicate. When advancement comes, it seems natural and inevitable rather than the result of competition or politics. This approach requires developing what might be called operational invisibility, the ability to achieve significant results through actions that appear routine or incidental to casual observation. The master of this skill learns to embed their most important moves within activities that seem ordinary or even beneficial to others. The creation of operational invisibility begins with understanding the difference between what people pay attention to and what actually matters. Most people focus on dramatic events, obvious displays of power, and immediate consequences. They miss the subtle adjustments, the gradual shifts, and the long-term positioning that actually determines outcomes. A real estate investor spent 5 years attending community meetings, volunteering for local charities, and building relationships with city officials, all while maintaining a modest profile as a concerned citizen. During this time, he carefully studied development patterns, zoning regulations, and infrastructure plans. When he finally began acquiring properties, his purchases appeared to be small, unconnected investments by a local resident. Only years later, when major developments made his holdings extremely valuable, did anyone realize that his community involvement had given him access to information and relationships that made his success virtually guaranteed. This type of operation succeeds because it unfolds over timescales that exceed most people's attention spans and involves activities that seem unrelated to the ultimate goal. By the time the connection becomes apparent, the advantage has become irreversible, and any attempt to replicate it would require starting over from the beginning. The Ruthless calculator also masters the art of competitive invisibility, achieving dominance in ways that do not trigger competitive responses from potential rivals. This requires understanding that most competitive behavior is reactive, responding to perceived threats rather than actual ones. By maintaining the appearance of focusing on different objectives, operating in different markets, or serving different constituencies, it becomes possible to build overwhelming advantages before competitors recognize that competition exists. Technology companies have mastered this approach, often entering markets by solving problems that established players consider too small or too different from their core business to worry about. By the time the new entrant solution has evolved to threaten the core market, they have built capabilities and customer relationships that make effective response extremely difficult. The key insight is that competitive responses are most effective early in the process, when advantages are small and easily countered. Once significant advantages have accumulated, even direct competition may not be sufficient to dislodge a well-positioned player. The silent strategist therefore focuses on avoiding early detection while building the kind of advantages that become more powerful over time. This principle applies equally to personal and professional development. Rather than announcing ambitious goals and inviting comparison with others pursuing similar objectives, the strategic individual quietly develops capabilities and relationships that will prove valuable when opportunities arise. They avoid the competitive dynamics that drain energy and attention while building the kind of comprehensive advantages that make competition irrelevant. The development of ruthless clarity also requires learning to read the real power structures that exist within any organization or community, which are often quite different from the official hierarchies and formal processes. Every group develops informal networks of influence based on who actually gets things done, who has access to crucial information, and who can facilitate or block the actions of others. The silent strategist maps these networks carefully, identifying the individuals who occupy critical nodes in the flow of information, resources, and decision-making authority. These people are not always those with the most impressive titles or the highest positions in the formal hierarchy. They are often the assistants who control access to executives, the technical specialists who understand crucial systems, the long-term employees who know how to navigate bureaucratic processes. Building relationships with these critical nodes requires abandoning the status-focused approach that most people use in professional networking. Instead of seeking relationships with the most obviously powerful people, the strategic networker identifies those whose cooperation or obstruction can determine success or failure for any initiative. This might mean spending time with the facilities manager who controls office space allocation, the budget analyst who can expedite or delay financial approvals, or the scheduler who determines when important meetings happen and who gets invited. These relationships are often easier to build because fewer people compete for the attention of those who are not obviously powerful, and they can provide more practical value than connections to high-profile individuals who have many demands on their time. The ruthless calculator also learns to think systemically about obstacles and opportunities, recognizing that most problems cannot be solved directly but can be made irrelevant through changes to the surrounding system. This requires shifting from a problem-solving mindset to a problem-dissolving mindset, finding ways to make difficulties disappear by changing the context in which they exist. A small business owner faced with aggressive pricing from a large competitor did not attempt to match their prices or find ways to reduce costs. Instead, she restructured her service offering to focus on customization and rapid response times, areas where the large competitor's systems and processes created disadvantages rather than advantages. By changing the competitive landscape to emphasize factors where size was a liability rather than an asset, she made the pricing competition irrelevant while building a more defensible market position. This type of strategic thinking requires developing the ability to see problems from multiple angles and to recognize that the most effective solutions often involve changing the rules of the game rather than playing more skillfully by existing rules. It demands a kind of cognitive flexibility that most people never develop because they are too focused on immediate challenges to step back and examine the larger system in which those challenges exist. The mastery of ruthless calculation ultimately leads to what might be called strategic optionality, the ability to respond to changing circumstances with moves that others cannot anticipate or counter effectively. This is achieved by maintaining multiple concurrent initiatives, building relationships in diverse areas, and developing capabilities that can be combined in unexpected ways when opportunities arise. The silent strategist operates like a chess grandmaster who thinks many moves ahead, but with the crucial difference that they are also able to change the rules of the game when necessary. They build positions that provide multiple paths to victory while limiting their opponent's options, creating situations where they can win through several different means while their rivals can succeed only through increasingly unlikely scenarios. This approach requires enormous patience and discipline, because the temptation is always to use accumulated advantages for immediate gains rather than continuing to build more comprehensive positions. The weak self wants to cash in its chips early, to enjoy recognition for its cleverness, to claim credit for its successes. The strategic self understands that premature revelation of advantages often leads to their neutralization, and that the most powerful positions are those that continue to generate opportunities for further advancement. The destruction of the weak self reaches completion when an individual can pursue long-term strategic objectives without needing external validation or immediate rewards. They find satisfaction in the elegant execution of complex plans, in the quiet accumulation of useful capabilities, and in the knowledge that they are building something that will prove its value when the time is right. This psychological shift represents a fundamental evolution from reactive to proactive existence, from responding to circumstances to creating them. The individual who achieves this transformation discovers that they have moved from being a player in games created by others to being an architect of the contexts in which those games are played. Part 3, The Invisible Crown: Absolute Victory Through Strategic Disappearance. The final evolution of the silent strategist transcends even the sophisticated manipulation of systems and people, reaching a level where victory becomes so complete and invisible that the very notion of competition dissolves. This is not merely winning while remaining unseen, it is creating conditions where one's objectives are achieved through the willing cooperation of others who believe they are acting in their own interests. At this level, power becomes so perfectly integrated with natural processes that it appears not to be power at all. In the marble halls of ancient Rome, there were senators whose names appeared in no histories, whose speeches were never recorded, whose political positions were never clearly defined. Yet their influence shaped the empire's direction more profoundly than those whose statues lined the forums. They had learned the ultimate secret, that the highest form of power is indistinguishable from the natural order of things, that the greatest victories are those where the defeated never realize they have lost, and that absolute control is achieved not through domination but through making oneself indispensable to everyone while being owned by no one. This represents the final destruction of the weak self and its replacement with something that might be called strategic essence, a way of being that naturally generates desired outcomes without apparent effort or intervention. The individual who reaches this level has moved beyond tactics and techniques to embody principles that automatically create advantageous circumstances. The transformation begins with recognizing that all previous approaches, however sophisticated, still operate from a position of separation between the strategist and their environment. Even the most elegant manipulation assumes a relationship of opposition between one's will and external circumstances. The final evolution transcends this opposition by achieving perfect integration with the systems one seeks to influence. Consider the advisor who becomes so essential to a leader's decision-making process that their perspective automatically influences every choice, yet in ways that feel completely natural to the leader. This is achieved not through persuasion or manipulation but by becoming genuinely indispensable, by developing unique capabilities, insights, or connections that make the leader more effective in all areas. The influence flows naturally from value provided rather than from any attempt to control or direct. This principle scales to every level of human interaction. In business, it represents becoming the partner that everyone wants to work with because collaboration with you reliably produces better results than working alone. In social contexts, it means becoming the person whose presence makes every gathering more interesting and productive. In intellectual endeavors, it involves developing insights that naturally advance any conversation or project in which you participate. The achievement of this level requires abandoning the last vestiges of ego-driven behavior and replacing them with what might be called ecological thinking, understanding oneself as part of larger systems and finding ways to enhance those systems while naturally benefiting from their improved functioning. This is the difference between parasitic and symbiotic relationships. The parasite extracts value from its host, gradually weakening it, while the symbiotic organism provides value that enhances the host's capabilities. The strategist who achieves ecological integration discovers that sustainable power comes not from taking but from giving in ways that create ongoing mutual benefit. They become valuable enough that others actively seek to maintain and strengthen the relationship, creating a situation where their influence grows automatically as the success of those around them increases. This transformation requires developing what might be called strategic authenticity, becoming genuinely valuable rather than merely appearing so. The sophisticated manipulator can maintain an appearance of value for extended periods, but such deceptions eventually collapse under their own contradictions. True strategic integration requires actually developing the capabilities, insights, and character that make others' lives consistently better through association. The process of becoming genuinely valuable while maintaining strategic invisibility represents perhaps the most challenging aspect of this evolution. It requires excellence in areas that others notice and appreciate while maintaining advantages in areas that they do not recognize or understand. The visible value creates the relationships and opportunities. The invisible advantages ensure that one can capitalize on those opportunities more effectively than others could. A technology executive spent decades developing deep expertise in emerging technologies while simultaneously building an unprecedented understanding of regulatory environments, cultural trends, and geopolitical developments. His technical knowledge made him valuable to colleagues and partners. His broader understanding allowed him to identify opportunities and avoid pitfalls that others with similar technical skills missed entirely. Companies competed to have him join their boards not because they understood the full scope of his strategic thinking but because his involvement consistently led to better outcomes. This type of integration creates what might be called strategic inevitability, outcomes that appear natural and unavoidable but actually result from sophisticated understanding and positioning. The strategic individual creates conditions where their preferred outcomes emerge as the logical result of circumstances that others view as fortunate coincidences or natural developments. The mastery of strategic inevitability requires learning to work with historical forces and social trends rather than against them, finding ways to position oneself to benefit from changes that are already developing but not yet widely recognized. This involves developing extraordinary sensitivity to emerging patterns and the patience to position oneself for developments that may unfold over years or decades. The silent strategist at this level operates like a surfer who reads ocean conditions with such precision that they can position themselves to catch waves that others do not even notice forming. They do not create the waves, the underlying forces are much larger than any individual, but they understand those forces well enough to consistently benefit from their movement. This approach extends to understanding cultural shifts, technological developments, economic cycles, and political changes. The strategist develops multiple forms of intelligence, technical, cultural, economic, political, and integrates them into a comprehensive understanding that allows for positioning ahead of major developments. The achievement of strategic invisibility at this level also requires mastering what might be called beneficial obscurity, remaining unknown to those who might oppose your objectives while being highly valued by those who can help achieve them. This is more sophisticated than simple hiding. It involves selective visibility that creates strong relationships where they are useful while maintaining low profiles in contexts where attention would be counterproductive. A financial strategist built a network of relationships with central bankers, treasury officials, and key regulators across multiple countries over the course of 20 years. His work in academic and policy circles made him well known and respected within those communities while remaining completely unknown to the general public and financial press. When major economic shifts occurred, he had access to insights and relationships that allowed him to position investments with extraordinary precision, generating returns that appeared to result from luck rather than insider knowledge. This type of selective visibility requires careful management of one's reputation and associations, ensuring that recognition in one area does not create unwanted attention in others. It often involves maintaining separate professional identities or operating through intermediaries who can provide necessary distance between different aspects of one's activities. The ultimate expression of strategic invisibility involves becoming so integrated with natural processes that one's influence appears to be simply the way things naturally unfold. This might involve becoming the person who naturally facilitates connections between others, who reliably provides useful insights in any discussion, or who consistently helps others achieve their objectives more effectively. The individual who reaches this level finds that opportunities flow to them naturally because others have learned to associate their presence with positive outcomes. They do not need to seek opportunities or compete for resources because their reputation for creating value generates more opportunities than they can pursue. This natural flow of opportunity represents the completion of the journey from weakness to strategic strength. The weak self must fight for recognition, compete for resources, and struggle to maintain its position. The strategically evolved self finds that others actively work to create opportunities for them because they have learned that such collaboration reliably benefits everyone involved. The achievement of this level also involves transcending the need for specific outcomes while remaining focused on ultimate objectives. The strategist learns to be attached to principles and general directions while remaining flexible about particular methods and timelines. This allows for adaptation to changing circumstances while maintaining long-term consistency of purpose. This might involve building companies that can evolve with technological change, creating investment strategies that benefit from multiple economic scenarios, or developing capabilities that remain valuable across different industries and contexts. The focus shifts from optimizing for current conditions to building adaptive capacity that can thrive under various future scenarios. The man who destroys his weak self and achieves strategic invisibility ultimately discovers that he has gained something more valuable than power over others. He has gained freedom from the need to exercise power directly. He influences outcomes not through coercion or manipulation but through having made himself genuinely valuable to those who make decisions. He achieves his objectives not by imposing his will on resistant systems but by finding ways to align his goals with natural processes and the genuine interests of others. This represents the ultimate victory, achieving one's deepest objectives while enhancing rather than diminishing the capabilities and options available to others. It is victory without conquest, influence without domination, and power without the responsibility and vulnerability that typically accompany obvious authority. The silent strategist who reaches this level has solved the fundamental problem of sustainable influence: how to achieve lasting impact without creating the resistance and counter-reactions that eventually destroy more conventional forms of power. By becoming valuable rather than threatening, essential rather than dominant, they create forms of influence that strengthen rather than diminish over time. In the end, the strategy of men who win silently reveals itself to be not merely about achieving success more effectively, but about transcending the limitations that make most forms of success temporary and vulnerable. It represents an evolution from competing within existing systems to becoming part of the processes by which those systems naturally evolve and improve. The individual who completes this transformation discovers that they have gained not just the ability to achieve their goals, but the deeper satisfaction of knowing that their success genuinely contributes to the flourishing of the larger systems of which they are part. They have learned to win not by defeating others but by making victory a natural expression of principles that benefit everyone involved. This is the ultimate destruction of weakness, not its replacement with crude strength, but its transformation into a way of being that naturally generates the outcomes one desires while contributing to the well-being of all those touched by one's influence. It is power perfected through its own invisibility, victory achieved through the willing cooperation of those who benefit from one's success, and influence that grows stronger precisely because it enhances rather than diminishes those it touches.